Welcome to the Bible Magazine and another conversation with Peter Owen in Wales. Pete, welcome to the program.
Thank you, John. Happy New Year. So nice to be with you again.
It is. It's actually 2026. And for those of us that watch events and Bible prophecy, 2026 it just feels like, we're just pushing further and further closer to the return of our Lord. And what a year 2025 was. I didn't even think this is so obvious to obviously do a bit of an overview of 2025, and yet we didn't mention that, nor did I think about it until right now. So, Pete, let's see what we can. Let's do a 2-minute. What did we get from 2025 you can go
John,
first.
I read an interesting article by John Simpson, who's the BBC News war correspondent. He has been for over 40 years, extremely well-respected journalist. And he wrote an article just last week reflecting on the last year. And he said, of all of the years that he's been a BBC journalist, he's never, ever known a year like 2025. And the number of wars across the world and the sort of challenge the world is in. And he talks about covering the Cold War, covering the Vietnam War, covering the Gulf War, going into wars in Africa, in Eastern Europe, that at the time were really challenging. He said, I've never, ever known a year like 2025 with all of the challenges across the world. So, when the Lord Jesus, in the Olivet's prophecy, talking about the end of the Jewish Commonwealth, it said that there'll be signs in the sun, the moon, the stars, and nations will be in distress, that the sea and the waves will be roaring. We use those verses often, don't we, to sort of reflect on the end of the Gentile era, which is our own era. And rightly so, I think. History repeats itself. That's the way God works. And it seems to me, just reading an article like that we really are living in unprecedented times by anyone's judgment. Forget Christadelphians, forget Bible students. Secular news organisations are looking at the last year and saying it is the most challenging year with wars across the world that can be remembered post the Second World War. So that was a pretty extraordinary article to read.
It is extraordinary, and it's sort of, when you say that, not surprising, I guess. But the thing is with it is when we then look across the areas that we're kind of most interested in, meaning from Bible prophecy's perspective, it's not that you don't care about other parts of the world, but what God's written about is what we have kind of information on. So you tend to focus there for obvious reasons. And that would be Middle East, and I would say for this, the war in Russia. Because 2025, Trump comes in January, and he was really, really quite sure that he could end that war in Russia with Ukraine very quickly. And he found, in fact, he was reflecting on it the other day, how, he thought it was going to be easy to end, and it proved anything but. And now Russia is continuing now to slowly push forward again. For all they talk about ceasefires there's been nothing of the sort, and it just seems like Russia is destined to, or at least in the near, we know long term, but even in the near time, it's just going to keep pushing. And even if she does sign an agreement, if Trump can manage to pull that off, it doesn't feel like it's going to last much, very long at all. We just had him, was it in the last couple of weeks, saying that Ukraine had bombed his house, or tried to, and then even the U.S. came out and said there's no evidence of it. They denied it. So whether he'll pull something out to just try and restart things, or if Russia's winning, what's going to stop them? And that seems to be, on that front, the kind of the 2025. Russia's slowly, ever so slowly turning the tide, and doesn't seem like she has a whole lot of desire to stop. And I think we would kind of expect, we have long expected as Christadelphians, but Bible students have long expected an expansionist Russia. So that is that's kind of super interesting. On the other side, and we'll dive more into Israel. On the other side, man, oh man, Israel has come out of this war, I guess, really stronger than ever. Even in economic deals that it's now cutting, it's unbelievable, unbelievable. Even even some of the voices that are loudest against Israel can't help but, I guess, even maybe be frustrated with Israel's progress. So, yeah, super interesting 2025. And where does it leave us? It leaves us with, as we say, the war continuing in Russia, and that would be in line with what we'd expect. The Middle East is still under complete restructuring. That's the way it seems to me.
And I think that you spoke about Trump in January. I mean, that really is the headline, isn't it, of the Trump coming into power in January 2025 and really driving at an unprecedented rate a political agenda, which he knows that he hasn't got to fight a second election. I mean, he hints at the idea that he may well look to change the constitution and be able to stand again in the next presidential election in 3 years from now. But I mean, at the moment, and certainly officially, constitutionally, it's never happened before. He finishes in 3 years' time, and therefore, without the pressure that most American presidents would feel as they come into a second term, having perhaps been bruised in midterm elections, and all the challenges of the second term that a president often has, Trump has come in for his second term in office, as it were, having had that gap, now with more energy, it seems, and certainly zeal than ever before, to make sure that his legacy is one that the world sits up and takes notice of, that he wants to be remembered, doesn't he, as a president that's managed to fix so many of the world's problems, despite undoubtedly that some of his decisions adding to challenges, let alone taking anything away. But without getting politically involved, him being in power has shaken up the world order. It's put European nations on the back foot. I mean, just this week, the situation in Venezuela, we've seen the likes of the Prime Minister in the UK just hamstrung in his ability to comment on it because of the fact that he's desperate to
needs
sort of
Trump.
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, he knows that if he dares to speak out against Trump, then Britain will be next in terms of the Trump's agenda and dismissing the Prime Minister here. And you see that across Europe. You see that in the sort of traditional allies of America and the sort of core of the West, Europe and the US, that the European nations don't know what to do. On the one hand, they're sort of bastions of international law, whatever that is, but they like talking about it a lot, and they like referring to it. And Keir Starmer, as a former lawyer, that the Prime Minister of the UK has sort of made the sort of the principles of his election manifesto being based on upholding international law, despite the fact that I don't know anyone really that really knows what international law is. But all the same, that's what the Labour Party, that's what he has been about. Trump does what he does. Many commentators, rightly or wrongly, feel that what he's done is against the principles of international law. When Keir Starmer's questioned on it, he does anything he can to avoid the question because he desperately doesn't want to fall out with Trump because Trump's so volatile. And I think that the shake-up that Trump's brought to the world order has has been extraordinary, and therefore the sort of core event of the last year that's led certainly to Israel's confidence in being willing to take on Iran and the proxy enemies, the likes of Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, in a way that they just wouldn't have been able to do before. I mean, I saw a speech where Netanyahu was in the US, wasn't he, last week, and he spoke in Florida to a Jewish audience.
I saw that one, yes.
Yeah, and he said, listen, he says that Biden wasn't that bad, but he says Trump has been like no president as a friend to Israel ever before, in that what the confidence that he's given that nation in being able to stand up to their enemies has been unprecedented.
That speech, this is an aside note, and then we'll come back. That speech was, Netanyahu was giving a powerful speech, as he does. That one made me a little bit sad, because all the way through it was just how good they were, how good Israel was. It was just pump my own tires all day. He was just pumping his own tires, and that of Israel and the IDF. And it's, the IDF has done amazing things, but I was just like, if you don't give God credit here before long, like, I am going to lose it. I was getting so frustrated with it, and at the end, it's like one sentence in the end. It's like sort of like with God's help or something. It was like one little blah at the end. I mean, everything he says, it is true. The IDF did fight like lions, and there's lots of that's true. All that might be sort of true, but to not give the credit to God. Now, many others in Israel do, but the prime minister, I just thought, you are even speaking in a synagogue. Like, this is an audience that should understand that you can, that clearly God's behind these. But yeah, that was my takeaway from
John,
a little bit.
I sadly, I quite agree, and I took exactly the same away from it. That there was, and as you rightly say, at the end he just briefly mentioned God, but he very often references the prophets. There was no reference to the prophets, and I felt that there was far too much emphasis on, sadly, his own brilliance. And the sort of brilliance of the people. And of course, in many respects, they are brilliant. But they're brilliant because of the fact that God has made them so. And you want that to be acknowledged by him. And that sadly, they're going to have to, and he is going to have to be humbled significantly. And of course, there's a sadness in that.
What I think is this, Pete. I'm not sure what I think. I think if you look at the data, the record will show that the nation is turning more religious, and after October 7th, it has significantly turned more religious. Okay, so the nation is turning more religious, and yet it's like the leadership hasn't caught up yet. And that I really believe that. Actually, I think that's true, and. I was listening to a gentleman by the name of Yishai Fleischer, and he put one up, and he was actually saying that Netanyahu's actually with another gentleman from the special forces in Israel, and they were questioning whether Netanyahu was actually good for Israel, for the fact that you always let essentially Hamas live another day. You don't quite finish off the Hezbollah. Netanyahu was facilitating payments from Qatar to Hamas before. I mean, I think that Israel's in an extremely difficult position. It just wants peace and quiet. When you pay Hamas, all Hamas did was say, thank you. Yeah, that's good. And we'll give you peace and quiet until we can build up our arsenal again. So I think Israel's learning some really hard lessons. But the people are more religious than he is. I think that's true. He will quote the prophets. He will do extremely good speeches. I just don't, I just think when that one was to the synagogue, I thought this is a friendly audience. If there's a time that we can recognize God's hand, come on, it's now. And doesn't.
He didn't.
So But it's I think you're getting an increasingly religious nation with a secular government. Although there are ministers that are religious, but for the overall, you've got a secular government and an increasingly religious population, which is going. God's in control, and whoever He puts in, and it's right at the right time. I think if you put in the hard religious right now into the government, you'd be at Armageddon immediately. The world would not be able to handle it. So I think in God's timing, that shift will come in the government. I thought a lot after that speech. So it's interesting to go back. Let's just go back because so that's 2025. Let's go back to this Venezuela thing. It does affect Israel in the fact that Venezuela was funding Hamas and Hezbollah. So it does affect Israel. It will benefit Israel. You're taking away funding for the terrorist groups. So, Venezuela, I think, was sending over cocaine to Hezbollah, and they were essentially processing it and sending it up into Europe. So you're cutting off the funding to these groups when you take out a Venezuela. I think that's true. I don't think that's why Trump went in there. I think that there's no question oils is a feature. I also think that they were sending a lot of drugs into America. But in the end, this is what everybody. I don't think anybody wasn't shocked when that went down. We're just not used to this America. And I was thinking, let's go to Bible prophecy, because in Bible prophecy we have Tarshish, which you and I put America alongside Tarshish. If we go back into history, into the British Empire, America is the eldest of the offspring, but the British Empire was expansionist, and it was all about its own interests, its own trade. Britain built up this empire, and it benefited Britain. So we could say it was Britain first, because that's what everybody likes to ask. Is it America first these days in America? So we have not seen a Tarshish power that's expansionist like this. Yet we've got, if we put Tarshish in, as Ezekiel 38 does, into the king of the south, the king of the south is not just some. I don't think we get the picture that it's some weak little power that is just, yes, it might have democracy and these sorts of things, but it still is, in Zechariah, one of the mountains of brass. You've got the two mountains, the mountain of brass to the north and the mountain of brass to the south, and the chariots come between.
Horse rides between,
Yeah. So that picture, when we put that next to Ezekiel 38, I think it's an interesting view from God's angle, and that is two mountains of brass. Brass, of course, is a symbol for man. Like when we have Goliath, he couldn't have more brass on him. It's man. And so you've got these two powers. Now, we all can see that Russia is expansionist, and I don't think that this means that America is going to completely turn its back on the way it's been. But I just literally, when I saw the news on, was it Saturday morning here? It was early Saturday morning here when I woke up and saw the news. I just went, this is not the America that we've been used to. And yet I think, what's your thoughts on the way? Because my thought is that it only kind of allows. Now I know it's not a fair, because America's going in there to Nicolas Maduro. He was already lost an election. They say he is sort of rejected by his own people. He's running a drug smuggling enterprise. So it's not like you're taking out a good actor by any stretch of the imagination. At the same time, this is an America that we're not used to.
Listen, I quite agree. I mean, whatever international law is, and as I say, I can't ever find anything that really nails anything down to me. But needless to say, there's been a sort of umbrella international law post the Second World War that the nations of the West have sort of used to sort of have a strong arm influence on the rest of the world, that has meant that there's been an expectation that there is no more empire building. You know, we're done with empire. We're going to create a global world with global trade. So we're all going to be able to benefit from each other. But the borders as they are the borders as they are, and we all agree that we'll stick with those borders. And Trump has ripped that up, really. And it is odd because in his first term, he spoke at length about not wanting to be involved in forever wars, and criticised his predecessors for sending American troops anywhere beyond America. You know, this is America first, that we don't need to do this. But clearly he's had his eyes, hasn't he, on the territory in the south, in that, you know, he's renamed the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, and wants everyone to sort of, you know, jump to that. He as you mentioned, he's sick and tired of the likes of Venezuela, and I'm sure that there are others besides, likes of Colombia, Cuba, sending narcotics into America, and the impact that drugs are having on undermining Western countries in terms of their costs of healthcare, that people's lack of ability to go to work and to be effective in their lives. Drugs is like the scourge of the West, isn't it? That Western powers they've got more money than other nations, but then that a lot of money, billions of pounds, billions of dollars, is spent on drugs, cocaine coming out of these countries, that is completely undermining the sort of fabric of societies in the West. And so he wants to do something about that. And although, you know, he openly speaks about it being, you know, a narco war, or not a war, but you know, he says it's not a war, doesn't he? But what undoubtedly part of what he's doing here is cutting off the oil supplies that are going to the likes of Iran and China. I mean, the following day, it was Iran and China that spoke out to say, you know, we insist on the immediate release of the Venezuelan president. You know, Maduro's got to be released immediately. This is absolutely unacceptable. And for them, they must be absolutely up in arms. I mean, China buys a huge amount of Venezuelan oil. Iran takes in Venezuelan oil, and you know, clearly the ships are used as, I mean, you talked about, and I didn't know that, but they're actually cocaine going to Hamas, which is then sold up into Europe. So I think that Maduro's clearly, you know, got a good thing going on with the likes of China, with the likes of Iran, and that Trump knows that very, very well, and he's upsetting that, and he's spoken about putting American multinationals into Venezuela to get the oil, get it coming out of the country, to make the country wealthy, and to pay back American resources for what they've had to do to deal with Maduro and all the problems of drugs coming in. So he wants America to siphon off a massive amount of the wealth that comes out of that oil. But I think that central to Bible prophecy isn't necessarily the war on drugs, but it certainly is the export of oil from Venezuela to the likes of China and Iran, and that stopping is once again going to have a big impact, and Israel must be rubbing their hands together.
Yeah, there's no question it benefits Israel. There's absolutely no question. I think it's that's true. So what I'm thinking, Pete, is that so he references that it's in the press conference, and certainly in when he's flying in Air Force One the other night, 2 nights ago. he references something called the Monroe Doctrine. And the Monroe Doctrine was, and I've just pulled up a definition so I don't get it, make sure I get it right. It's a principle of U.S. policy originated by President James Monroe in 1823 that any intervention by external powers in the politics of the Americas, so not just America, in the Americas, is a potentially hostile act against the U.S. So he is looking at, and he said that he's renamed it not just the Monroe Doctrine, but the Donroe Doctrine. So now it's the Donroe Doctrine, and the Donroe Doctrine is essentially saying, I'm not having Venezuela sitting there essentially friendly with Iran, Russia, and China sitting. And if you look on a map, it's not that far before you're into Cuba and into southern Florida. So he's saying, I'm not having this as a neighbor. Now, what's kind of interesting is the Monroe Doctrine, or now the Donroe Doctrine, is the idea that he doesn't want intervention by external powers in the politics of the Americas and sees it as a potentially hostile act against the U.S. This is the thing. Isn't that what essentially Russia's saying with Ukraine? We don't want Western influence in Ukraine, and Ukraine needs to be essentially neutral. Oh, you're not going to be neutral. Okay, we're invading. That's at least what is being said on the surface from Russia. So it's interesting that both those mountains of brass are both essentially protecting,
empire building.
They see it, their interests. Against, and this one is against Russia. Like what's happened in Venezuela is against Russia. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, yeah, I quite agree, really. And of course, what the European nations, and then when Biden was in power with America's support, and Canada with Trudeau, and Carney would be just the same. What their rhetoric against Russia has been is, you can't do this to a nation state,
right? Yes.
This is. It doesn't matter that this is that they're not with NATO. Ultimately, you can't just come in and take and what Zelensky has, been desperately getting Trump to try to see is, we can't allow them. We can't do a deal that just says, okay, you can have the Donbass, you can have the Eastern Territory, because if we allow this to happen, then at some stage they'll just say, okay, we'll roll on and take a bit more. We'll roll on and take a bit more. Either nation states have got territorial integrity or they haven't, and what for decades the West has broadly stood for is nations have. And Trump, in doing what he's done in Venezuela just this last week, has possibly totally undermined the foreign policy efforts of his traditional allies in what they've had to say to Putin. Putin, again, must be thinking, fantastic. Many commentators have made the point this week. How can Trump possibly say to Putin, you can't do this, if he's prepared to go in and just remove the leader of a nation state? Now, it seems, and most, again, in the West and in the United Nations, do believe that Maduro didn't get in by a fair election. But all the same, he is in, and he has been in for many years. It's not like, he's new to government. He's been the president since, I think, 2013 or something like that. So, it's pretty crazy to just say, you know what, we don't want you any longer, and to do the operation that he did, which by all accounts seemed to be an extraordinary act of American military might. That they were able to go in and do it.
150 planes in the air.
Absolutely incredible. The cost of an operation like that, again, is simply enormous, which is one of the reasons he'll speak about, why he'll need to take the oil from Venezuela back to the US.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's true that America also, Maduro kicked out all the American oil companies. So they're, they have the question. I think the reality is whether or not it is a legitimate comparison to Ukraine or not. Russia's going to use it.
Yeah,
Whether it's legitimate or not, it's going to be used. So now here's the interesting thing, because then when you listen to Marco Rubio speak at the press conference that was held the morning after the raid, and see what you think of this.
Well, I don't have much to add to what you've heard now, other than the following points. Nicolas Maduro was indicted in 2020 in the United States. He is not the legitimate president of Venezuela. That's not just us saying it. The first Trump administration, the Biden administration, the second Trump administration, none of those three recognized him. He's not recognized by the European Union and multiple countries around the world. He is a fugitive of American justice with a $50 million reward, which I guess we saved $50 million. And
make sure.
Yeah, exactly. But
don't let anybody claim it. Nobody deserves it but us.
But I want to be clear about one thing. Nicolas Maduro had multiple opportunities to avoid this. He was provided multiple very, very, very generous offers and chose instead to act like a wild man, chose instead to play around. And the result is what we saw tonight. The other message here is the following. You have a guy, like many people around the world, they like to play games. You have a guy who decides he's going to invite Iran into his country, is going to, do the confiscation of American oil companies, is going to flood our country with gang members, is going to take Americans prisoner and try to hold them for hostage and trade them like he was able to do with the Biden administration. Basically likes to play games all this time and thinks nothing's going to happen. And I hope what people now understand is that we have a president. The 47th president of the United States is not a game player. When he tells you that he's going to do something, when tells you he's going to address a problem, he means it. He actions it. I can tell you, I've watched this process now for 14, 15 years, been around it. Everybody talks. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. When I get there, we're going to do this. We're going to take. This is a president of action. Like, I don't understand yet how they haven't figured this out. And now, if you don't know, now you know. Because this is the way it's going to play out. And I think people need to understand that this is not a president that just talks and does letters and press conferences. And, if he says he's serious about something, he means it. And this is something that was a direct threat to the national interest of the United States, and the president addressed it. There's a president of peace, by the way. I told you what I just said earlier. This guy had multiple opportunities to find his way somewhere else and figure out another. He could have been living somewhere else right now very happy, but instead he wanted to play big boy. And so now, he's got other sets of problems on his hands. And but I think the message here should be for the world. Look, the president doesn't go out looking for people to pick fights with. He's not generally wants to get along with everybody. We'll talk and meet with anybody, but don't play games. Don't play games with this president's in office, because it's not going to turn out well. And so I hope that I guess that lesson was learned last night, and we hope it'll be instructive moving forward.
Is that a message for Cuba, Mr. President?
Mr. President. So I don't know what you make
Brilliant,
of that, Pete.
I've seen it, actually. It's brilliant. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. Okay, let me just see where... It is the reason I play that, Pete, is because things are different under Trump. Things have changed. And what's the message now? And everybody's saying it. What's the message to Iran? What is the message to those other nations that essentially have been challenging America, but as far as we're concerned with Bible prophecy, challenging Israel? It really is, if you look at Ezekiel 38 and the prophecies we so often refer to, we really do expect this southern mountain of brass to not necessarily just be a complete walkover. It's still a mountain of brass. It's an opposing force
I think, John,
northern power.
That's right. I think that because in Ezekiel 38, you've got the focus on the king of the north nations in the first few verses. And then in Ezekiel 38, the king of the south, their actions don't play, in the king of the north, in Ezekiel 38, the focus isn't particularly on the king of the south. It's on the king of the north, who's going to be the instigator to come sweeping down into the land of Israel, which is central to that story. 100%. And so the king of the south asked the question, are you come to take a spoil? And I think sometimes that question can sort of be like, weakly asked, are you come to take a spoil? As if the king of the South nations are powerless to do anything about it, and absolutely sort of just a bunch of weak nations sort of thing. Well, that's just not the case necessarily at all. The focus on Ezekiel 38 is about the king of the north driving down. In Daniel 11, the focus on the king of the north. But as you rightly point out, that Zechariah prophecy I think is really helpful in making the point. Listen, there are two mountains of brass. And again, I think sometimes people can sort of slip into the mindset of the king of the north baddies, the king of the south goodies. Well, actually, again, that simply is not the case. The flesh is brass, north and south. And in both cases, you've got a mountain. And of course, the great irony is that the stone that will hit the image becomes a mountain that fills the whole earth. I think it is a really interesting point, and I think it is worth us being mindful of that we're not expecting necessarily some sort of weak, hopeless nations. I mean, all nations, if you like, strong, weak, whatever, are hopeless, and all require the Lord Jesus Christ to govern them eventually. But I think it is helpful for us to sort of recognise that, yes, America and the Tarshish powers may well still have some strength in their voice when the Lord Jesus Christ does come.
Yeah, and just for the record, that is Zechariah 6 for the mountains of brass. So here's the thing: is that it then goes on to say, well, what about Cuba? And they're essentially like, yeah, Cuba is about ready to fall anyway, and they have no love for Cuba nor for Colombia. That's fine, and everybody kind of is looking at this, kind of going, what do you mean? But the other nation that we haven't mentioned is, frankly, looking at this, is Greenland, because he keeps saying he wants Greenland. Now, okay, that's another area, but here's the takeaway for Greenland. They're going, okay, if this guy, if he truly wants Greenland, he can have it. Because there's not much anybody's going to do to stop it. And in fact, one of his aides, Stephen Miller, came out and said just that. And said, no one's going to stop us if we want it. I think
his wife might have tweeted this week, a picture of the U.S. flag set on on Greenland.
Here's the interesting thing, Pete, and that is there was it was an article, and it was put out by I think The Atlantic, but it is I'm going to see if I can grab it for you. U.S. Greenland, because there is no question Trump wants Greenland, but the problem is that if Trump takes Greenland, it has major implications. Now, The Guardian says how a U.S. takeover of Greenland would undermine NATO from within. Here it is. The Danish Prime Minister says a U.S. takeover of Greenland would mark the end of NATO. So this is getting really interesting, because in some way, one way or another, we don't think that NATO is able to survive. NATO is not the setup. We've talked about this many times, I think. NATO is not the situation, the picture that we find in Bible prophecy. Rather, this northern and southern power, not an east-west setup in Europe, neither a North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That's not the way it sits. So something's got to change, and it just feels as if this new expansionist, or at least aggressive, rightly or wrongly, America is something that the world, and Europe especially, is not going to be. They just don't. They don't relate to this. They don't connect with this. They don't. It is completely an anathema. Although Macron himself from France was careful what he said, but it is. It's. I think this is going to have a huge ripple effect.
Well, undoubtedly it is. And I mean, taking Britain, at the moment you've got a Labour government that are so low in the polls, and the Reform Party is sort of outperforming all the other parties currently in the polls. And I think that what we're seeing Keir Starmer doing in Britain is sort of trying desperately to hang on to Europe, because he personally and his government really, they believe in Europe. They believe in the European project, and that they see their strength in Europe. And Trump's driving him crackers, but he doesn't dare say it. But all the time he's sort of trying to work to sort of undermine Brexit, really, and to sort of pull Britain back towards Europe. We've seen that in headlines this last week. But I think it's highly likely that what we'll see in the next couple of years is that Britain will vote with her feet and will look to turn against Europe even more, and choose a government, choose leaders that will connect them more towards America. I think that someone like Carney, will see how he gets on, because I think that Canada will be part of the sort of Tarshish group of nations at the time of the end. And I think that the European nations will potentially start to give up on America and what America is, particularly if Trump just keeps calling them out for being weak and hopeless. And then it doesn't seem such a horrendous stretch of the imagination that at some stage Israel creates such ire in Europe. I mean, Israel already does create such tension in Europe that the likes of Russia and Israel and Europe could come together, could stand together, as it were, and that's the image standing on its feet in order to come against Israel. What we're seeing, and something like Greenland, which might just seem like, what's Greenland got to do with anything? Well, again, I've read those same articles that the Danish Prime Minister, and again, I mean, the British Prime Minister this week has said Greenland must only be for the Danish people and for the people of Greenland to decide. And I notice he's saying that because he's sort of giving himself a way out, that if the people of Greenland do decide to go with America, then that's his way out. But really, what he's saying is Denmark's a strong ally of ours, and we absolutely support Denmark. And you can't just go and take another nation state because you fancy it, or another piece of someone else's territory. But I just think that remarkably, a country like Greenland or a territory like Greenland is maybe something for us to watch, to see NATO start to internally crumble, and to see the Tarshish group of nations start to be pulled towards each other, Europe being pulled the other way, and then a connection at some stage between Europe and Russia. So again, we might look on and think, I just can't see some of those things happening. Well, who could have said, not long ago that an American president would say, I'm going to deal with Venezuela, I'm going to go in there and just take the head of state out. In addition, I'll be open about the fact that I think Greenland might be next up. So, we just live in remarkable times where you just got to keep your eye on the ball.
And in both cases, both with Venezuela and with Greenland, it's worth noting, I mean, what Trump says about Greenland is we need it for national security, and specifically against Russia in the fight over the Arctic. So in both Greenland and in Venezuela, it is both pushing back Russian influence, which is and goes back to the Monroe Doctrine to say this is our hemisphere, we rule over here, and essentially you can see Russia saying the same thing. There's a quote, Pete, that I've got here, and I thought I'd just mention it because it is in relation more to the King of the North. But isn't it interesting that when we look at the world, that this could this is starting to maybe just come into view? And this is John Thomas writing in Exposition of Daniel, and he writes, this is in my copy, page 91, he says, there may indeed be no more fighting between France and England as belligerent principles. Now remember, this is written in like 1850s, I think 1860s. There may be indeed no more fighting between France and England as belligerent principles, but their leaders are all wrong in supposing that the age of conquest is past forever, and that they will succeed in establishing the freedom and independence of Europe. There has never been such an age of conquest as that which will soon be upon the world. And as to the establishment of European freedom and independence, the war to be initiated in the setting in of an overwhelming inundation that will submerge them under one of the most terrible and scorching despotisms that ever wrung the heart of the nations. And it carries on about England. So this is, to go back to Russia and Ukraine, it fits in with Bible prophecy that Russia would look to expand west, certainly in taking over her historic lands. But the idea that I was thinking it when I was chewing over it with America. I remembered this quote and I went and dug it out. The age, there never has been such an age of conquest as that which will soon open upon the world. If you just take that, it's like, well, we would apply that directly to the King of the North, and that's right. But it's interesting to see it being echoed just even slightly from the King of the South saying, Monroe Doctrine will frankly be king over our hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere. So it's certainly.
I think in terms of Russian, as you point out there, that we can well expect Russia to sort of certainly be extremely interested in its ancient heartlands, or not even ancient, the sort of old USSR territory, but I think that from my point of view, I don't necessarily think that Russia has to take complete control of Europe. I mean, when the image stands up, there are two legs to the image. It's not one great empire, as it were. You've got Russia, the dragon power in the east. You've got the beast power, Revelation 16, coming to Armageddon in the west. But clearly, they've got the image has got to stand on its feet together, and ultimately it's one image, albeit two legs to the image. So there's one mind that is the driver, and that's Gog, of the land of Magog, and Magog we believe compromises the likes of Ukraine and pushing right out to the west, including the likes of Germany in ancient times. So in other words, what I think is that we can expect to see a dragon and a beast. Yes, there's one head, Gog, who is Russia, who's driving that image to come down onto the mountains of Israel. But we don't necessarily have to see Russia sort of swamping the whole of Europe and chaining up every aspect of Europe in order for that section of Bible prophecy to be fulfilled. Ultimately, Russia has to have one foot in Constantinople and religiously somewhere else in the west, in Rome, to be able to, for the image to be able to stand up. And don't forget that in Revelation 16, that when the Lord Jesus Christ comes to the Battle of Armageddon to save the Jews, the dragon power is destroyed, and that is the grain harvest, the Eastern influence. But the beast and the false prophet live on. In fact, when we come to Revelation 17, the false prophet is described as being the woman riding the beast. So expect the European nations to be able to sort of survive Armageddon, that they then end up giving their power and their strength to the beast of Europe, that they come together, which is why we're so interested in the European armies at the moment starting to take seriously conscription and wanting to sort of start to form armies, because we expect to see that at the time of the end. But those armies will pull together. They'll give their power and their strength to the beast, and then they'll fight with the Lord Jesus Christ in mainland Europe for what we believe to be a period of about 30 years before they're eventually utterly destroyed and subdued. So I just make that point that yes, Russia is empire building. Yes, Russia, we fully expect to ultimately come through the likes of Ukraine, to come down into the likes of Turkey. And yes, to be very much confederate with the likes of Gomer, but ultimately not necessarily to have taken over the nations of Europe.
But I do think, and I think, and it's not to push back, Pete, on it, but I think you'd agree that when we come to that, essentially the fourth beast, or as we see it in the other nations, sorry, not in the other nations, in the other beasts, when we come to Daniel, the military power comes from that eastern side, as you get it in Daniel 7 and
Gog
19.
is the leader.
Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful or terrible, whose teeth were of iron and his nails of brass. So we've talked about the brazen claws on that fourth beast. That's an eastern side where you would then expect it, as it comes to stamp the residue with its feet. So where's its military power? It would seem it's on the brazen side, which would be and that would be from the Greek side, the Byzantine side, at which Russia has claimed. So it is true that it stands on two legs, but militarily its power exists in the east. Is that
absolutely? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's the dragon that's destroyed.
Yeah.
At Armageddon. The beast lives on. The beast lives post Armageddon.
And
the Western nations of Europe.
Yeah, and when we come to Ezekiel 39, the fire goes up, into Magog. So it moves north to then bring God's judgments forward. So, yeah, so when we look at these things and we just look at the world today, there's another quote which is one of my favorites. Then it's John Thomas saying that at the end it will be an age of astonishments, which I just think is so profound, because the world is taking such incredibly interesting turns, and as we bob and we weave, and you think you didn't expect that, and now it moves over here, and you say, well, I didn't expect that, and it's just so amazing to see that through it all, the purpose of God is being worked out. This age of conquest, are we going to start to move into that? I mean, we already have, I suppose, with Russia slowly expanding I guess when it went into Georgia. It's still got troops in Georgia. So slowly it's been expanding. But at some point there is this where it comes like a whirlwind. So there is a point at which this, the Gog power, I guess you'd say, the dragon side, does seem to get a little more.
I mean, let's face it. I mean, looking on the other power, the King of the South power, and looking at what America have done this week. I mean, who the week before last could possibly have predicted what just happened in Venezuela? I mean,
certainly not Venezuela.
Not Maduro, who was dancing away, thinking he was, beyond anything that Americans' reach could get to. But I think that, nearly all of us, 99.99999% of the world woke up, and that was a whirlwind. That was that's what we're expecting to see at the time of the end from the likes of Gog, as you say, when they eventually choose to come down into Israel. That it will just happen like that. They'll just come sweeping down.
Okay, so yes, all right. So now we'll just end with. I think we'll end just on in Israel, because we've had some. Again, this is coming out of really the fallout from October 7th and these things, and that is Israel. Interestingly, many of the settler leaders and those ones in Israel wanted to go back to Gaza and rebuild settlements. Israel essentially said no, and so. But they have expanded, as we did just briefly mention this before we were live here, that 19 new settlements have been approved for building. There's always a difference between approved for building and actual building, but it does seem as if Israel is moving ahead with speed in the, I don't like to call it the West Bank, but in Judea and Samaria. It is going to push forward with settlement activity, building more, and also pushing back against the sort of the terror nests that it says is there. In fact, terrorism has apparently come down significantly. It's a lot safer in some of those areas because Israel's really been pushing hard even though it doesn't always hit the news too much. They've been pushing hard against terror groups that are embedded there in Judea, Samaria. And this is, we've talked about this thing last time, the focus is slowly going to move in, as far as Israel's concerned, into the mountains of Israel.
Well, I always think it's amazing. Ezekiel 36 is absolutely focused on the mountains. It tells us that there will be a build-up of Jewish people on the mountains before Ezekiel 38, when Gog comes down. In fact, there's that famous quote from John Thomas that, you know, there will have been a considerable gathering of Israelites upon the mountains before the invasion of the country by Gog. And if I speak on that, I often say to people, you know, what do you think a considerable gathering would be? You know, what do you think he was expecting? Because bear in mind, at that point, you know, there's no state of Israel. I mean, he's writing in 1848. So he's writing 100 years before. There's a handful of Jews there.
There's a handful of Jews. That's it, like handful of Jews.
But he can see from Ezekiel 36, Ezekiel 38, that it's the mountains that the controversy is at. He can see from Ezekiel 36 that there's going to be a build-up of Jews on the mountains, because it says, Ezekiel 36, verse the likes of 11, you know, that God says, I'll settle you, you'll build on the mountains. And of course, that's one of the great signs of our times, that post 67, when the Jews took again, 2,000 years later, that territory, the mountains, the hills of Judea and Samaria, that what they've done is they've got the very land that the ancient prophets speak of, that here they are building, and remarkably, of course, the international community is absolutely furious with them, despite the fact that, you know, when you think of what nations have taken in the last, few years, I mean, we're talking about a tiny pocket of land. But of course, it's not surprising as Bible students, because it is the very controversy of the last days. The controversy of the last days is what Israel choose to do there. And I thought there was such an irony that on December the 25th, on Christmas Day, on the day when, a huge percentage of the world's Christians celebrate, incorrectly of course, but celebrate the birth of Jesus, that on that very day, 14 nations, most of whom are Christian, all of whom I think are Christian nations, likes of Europe and Canada and America, send a statement out condemning Israel for their them saying that they're going to continue to build on the mountains, and that there's 19, as you say, new settlement projects that have been agreed in the Knesset to be built on the mountains. I think, can't you see the irony that on the very day that you're celebrating the birth of a Jewish man born in Bethlehem, and by the way, if you look at a map of the territory that the 19 new settlements are, the map will have in its south Bethlehem. And so isn't there just an extraordinary irony that this Jewish man born in Bethlehem is being celebrated, his birth on this day, by so many in sort of crackpot religious ceremonies across the world. But all the same, on that day, these nations release a statement saying, this isn't yours, to the Jews. This isn't yours. I mean, how is the irony not lost on them?
Unbelievable. Yeah, it's unbelievable. Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, the world is so they it's always the age-old problem, They want to try and use the scripture to build up their own theology, for use, for lack of a better word, their own belief structure. The problem is that they're using a Jewish scripture that was given to the Jews as the Old Testament, and even the New Testament, although it's written in Greek. You've got Christ saying, "I've been sent to the Jews." Even the apostles at first are sent out to the Jews. Christ comes; he's born King of the Jews. He's killed as King of the Jews. You open the book of Revelation,
and he tells the Jews, the Jews are going to come back to the land.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. The Jews are going to go out. Luke 21. Yeah. So it's all the way through. It's still, even though they try to replace it, it's like the Jews do not. It does not fail. You open the last book that he gives to John, the book of Revelation, and you open up with him talking about the time when the tribes will be restored and look on him. So it is. Yeah. It's all the way through the New Testament. The idea of replacement theology, you have to really, really, you got to try hard. You really do.
And in addition, tragically, you do that. You miss the greatest sign of our age. And the greatest sign of the age is the coming again of the Jews. Because that is the demonstration that a nation that was dead, to all intents and purposes, the world was dead. I mean, of course, they never were, but from the world's point of view, for 2,000 years, they don't have a homeland. That dead nation is resurrected. And that is the demonstration in our age that, yes, the resurrection of the Lord Jesus happened, the resurrection of the nation has happened, and you too can be resurrected, as it were. You too, who are, to us all, we're all dead in trespasses and sins, and yet the hope of the gospel is the hope of Israel. What is the hope of Israel? A dead nation can get resurrected. Our hope, the hope of Israel, is that we who once were dead in trespasses and sins can be made alive because of the gospel message. So replacement theology dismisses all of that. And no wonder your average person in the West these days hasn't got a clue what they actually believe and what the Bible teaches.
Yeah, it's so true. Pete, I'm going to try and pull it to an end because I know time is not on our side, but I just can't help but pointing out two news articles here that are that sort of highlights what's happened in Israel, and sort of since we last spoke. This is 3 weeks ago. Jerusalem Post: Israeli exports in 2025 near pre-war peak. So they're already back up to where they were on exports. For all of the world's desperate attempts to try and undermine it, to bring boycotts, divestment, sanctions, all that stupidity, it hasn't done a single thing. And Israel's just now approved a $35 billion gas deal to export natural gas to Egypt. So out of all of this, for all the world has done to try and, they try to take over as far as being the chosen people, trying to cut the Jewishness of Jesus out, but then trying to cut the nation down itself, which is, we believe his project to reestablish, to restore, to rebuild. They can't hold any of it back. They can't hold any of it back. It is just, for all the war and all the trouble, Israel's come out stronger on almost every metric.
Yeah, it really is amazing. And when you think of what we've just spoken about in terms of Venezuelan oil and energy, and we know that the Russian economy is also built on exporting oil and gas across the world. And you can see that something like that, where Israel is becoming stronger and stronger and stronger and chooses to export gas to Egypt, we don't know what the spoil is, but we know from Ezekiel 38 that when Russia comes down, she comes to take a spoil. And we know from Daniel chapter 11 that she doesn't stop in Israel initially. She comes straight through Israel down into Egypt. So it just is interesting to see that Israel has signed that massive deal with Egypt, because we know that when Russia comes down, she comes down into Egypt, she takes control of the silver and gold there before coming back up to establish herself in Jerusalem. So, yeah, really, really interesting. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. It's, I don't know what's going to happen in between from now and when we chat next, but it could be, looks like Iran's almost on the brink of being invaded or, hit again on some level. So,
did you notice that in the news, I think it was this morning or yesterday, I think it was yesterday, the Iranian leader, the Western news anyway, saying that his plan is set that if Trump intervenes or if the uprising in Iran he can't get a grip on, his escape plan is to go to which nation, do you imagine?
Russia. Yeah, I saw that.
Russia, yeah. It's just interesting, isn't it?
Listen, this Bible prophecy, as you and I understand it, it literally never fails you. It just always is just holding true. I don't, for people that don't, they don't believe the Bible. They've turned away from it, and I just think if you're tuned into this stuff, you can't help, every time you turn around for you and I, as you look at these things and you look at world events, you just think everything, like literally everything is going to plan. Nothing isn't going to plan. So epic. It's so epic. When I saw, you're going to go to Russia. Of course you are. The interesting thing, and we're supposed to end, but the interesting thing with that is that Iran needs to, if you could just shut off Iran can still, the scripture tells us that Iran is going to be against Israel. But if Iran could just be held back a little bit from funding all these terror groups, it would quickly allow the Middle East to change. And, between Iran and Venezuela, if the funding gets cut to these terror groups, the Middle East is going to only change more rapidly.
Yeah.
There you go. We'll follow that next time, Pete. Thank you for your time. Thanks for chit-chatting again, and God willing, we will do it again if the Lord remains away.
Look forward to it. Thanks, John.
Pete. Be good.